Hello, welcome to week two of the online course on youth employability and entrepreneurship, the role of digital economy, a course delivered by the African Institute for Economic Development and Planning, IDEP of the UNHCA based in Dakar, Senegal. Congratulations once again for completing Module 1, and I welcome you to this fun-filled week that will be focusing on education and skills development and how it applies to your work. As stated earlier, I'm available to guide you through this process and can be reached via the email provided on the screen. Thank you and welcome on board. Yeah, so for Module 2, we will be looking at education and skills development, and it will happen the whole of this week. The session will explore and address the growing youth population and the investment needed to enhance young people's education and employment opportunities in order to leverage their human capital. The session will also explore quality education in line with SDG 4 and decent work in line with SDG 8 and some of the resistance that have come from Africa from various groups on the implementation of the SDG 4 and SDG 8. For instance, as regards sex education in schools, regards access to family planning services, and I'm sure there are a whole lot other forms of resistance you have seen in your work that you can also capture within the assignment aspect of Module 2. So at the end of this session, would expect that you would have had a deeper understanding on key factors that enable young people to acquire useful skills, including financial, entrepreneurial, and digital literacy skills, and increasing their exposure to networks and access to markets. Yeah, so for the introduction, we believe that education is an opportunity with the potential to transform lives, yet an estimated 258 million children, adolescents, and young people, or 70% of the global total, are not in school. And as UNESCO 2018 report shows, the share of sub-Saharan Africa in this global total increased from 24% in 2000 to 38% in 2018. I will expect that this number should grow by the end of 2021. Across sub-Saharan Africa, while teachers follow individualized teaching strategies, role modeling, peer support, and group strategies to promote inclusion of students with intellectual and developmental disabilities, we have also seen that there is still lack of human and material resources to ensure and enhance inclusive education across Africa. And this is one of the things that we would like you to focus your interventions on in developing advocacy messages, in developing your policy briefs that we need to, in line with SDGs 4 and SDGs 8, highlight the need for inclusive education on the principle of leave no one behind. Yeah, so the module 2, we'll be looking at education as a human right as far back as 1948, the key features of education, the policies and laws as being pivotal tools for inclusive education in Africa, the 2030 framework for action, inclusive education, and as it regards Agenda 2030, SDG 4 and the nexus between other SDGs, and possibility and importance of ensuring inclusive education for young people. SDG 4, looking at sexuality education and access to family planning services, as I earlier mentioned, some of the resistance that have come. And a very important framework strategy that I would encourage you to take time out, use even if it's a day or two to really understudy this because one is being implemented across Africa also it has so many provisions that are relevant to our field of work. And that is the Continental Education Strategy for Africa, otherwise known as CESA 16 to 2025. Then we also look at decent work for young people and Agenda 2030. What does decent work mean? And then the nexus between the SDG 8 targets and other SDGs. These are very important areas, and there are a whole lot more that you will be studying under the further reading part of this module. So I enjoin you to take the lecture notes and go through it, and also study the further reading. Education was first recognized as a human right in 1948. According to Article 1 of UNESCO Convention Against Discrimination in Education of 1960, governments are encouraged to prevent nullifying or impairing equality of treatment in the education sector. In 1999, the United Nations Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, in its General Comment 13 on the right to education, adopted a comprehensive framework on the right to education. And this is a framework that I'll encourage you to study because it talks a lot about education as a right and what needs to be done and what should be avoided. Let's look at the key features of education as highlighted by the United Nations Economic and Social Council in 1999. There are four key features: availability. Here you look at the rights, obligations, and it stipulates that education is free and there are adequate resources, infrastructure, and trained teachers able to support the delivery of education for all. When we look at the feature on accessibility, the rights obligations are looking at education system as non-discriminatory and physically and economically accessible to all. And positive steps are being taken to include the most marginalized citizens. For the feature and acceptability, the form and content of education is relevant, non-discriminatory, and culturally appropriate and of good quality. Schools are safe and teachers are professional. Very important rights and obligations. For adaptability, education evolves with the changing needs of society and challenges inequalities such as gender discrimination, and it adapts to specific local needs and contents. So by this, the UN invites member states to ensure that they look at the peculiarities of each country in adapting the interventions geared towards ensuring inclusive education, quality education. At this point, I would like to emphasize that laws and policies are very pivotal to ensuring inclusive education in Africa because laws and policies set the framework for achieving inclusion in education. According to UNESCO in 2017, inclusive education provides a systematic framework for identifying and dismantling barriers for vulnerable populations according to the principle that every learner matters and matters equally. But in spite of the good intentions enshrined in national laws and policies across Africa as regards inclusive education, we've seen that most governments often do not take the needed follow-up actions to ensure successful implementation. Therefore, we see a lot of barriers when it comes to access, progression, and learning, and disproportionately affecting more disadvantaged populations. So, this cause also enjoins African governments, practitioners, policymakers to explore inclusive laws and policies that will ensure quality and inclusive education across Africa. There is need to underscore the importance of 2030 framework for action because it provides guidance for the implementation of SDG 4 as regards quality education at both national, regional, and global levels. Interestingly, Education 2030 devotes considerable attention to technical and vocational skills development, especially regarding access to affordable quality technical and vocational education and training, as we know, TVET, which is expected to address the multiple demands of an economic, social, and environmental nature that helps young people and adults to develop skills that will be needed for employment, decent work and entrepreneurship, as well as promote equitable, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth and support transitions to green economies and environmental sustainability. When we look at inclusive education within the context of Agenda 2030, we need to understand that even though education plays a central theme in the 2030 agenda, it is also treated as a standalone goal with its seven outcome targets and three means of implementation. So, in a nutshell, SDG 4 aims to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education, promote lifelong learning opportunities for all by 2030. It also ensures that all girls and boys complete free primary and secondary schooling by 2030. This is a dream for Africa, and we need to work towards achieving this. SDG 4 also has 11 global indicators for monitoring adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 2017 and based on universal principles and a participatory approach that ensures that all stakeholders, including young people themselves, recognize their shared responsibility and roles in achieving the SDGs, remembering the concept and the principle of leaving no one behind. Across the globe, efforts have been made to promote universal education, and this has seen in recent decades the years of primary school enrollment increase and has led to the demand for secondary schooling. Unfortunately for us here in Africa, even with the giant strides being made to promote inclusive education in relation to SDG 4, young people are yet to enjoy the benefits of inclusive education because they continue to face a variety of socio-economic barriers that impede entry, progression, and learning for them. So, achieving inclusive and equitable quality education for young Africans and other vulnerable persons, including persons with disabilities and albinism, indigenous people, refugees, and poor people in rural areas, requires the protection and promotion of fundamental rights to affordable and qualitative education for all categories of young people, regardless of their age, gender, location, ability, needs, status, or background. Despite the promotions of SDG 4 as relates inclusive education, there are some forms of resistance to the successful implementation of the targets and goals of SDG 4. For instance, when it comes to sexuality education, Target 3.7 of the SDG enjoins member states to ensure that by 2030 there is universal access to sexual and reproductive health care services, including for family planning, information and education, and integration of reproductive health into national strategies and programs. This objective has met with different oppositions. An example is the group in Jamra in Senegal that oppose the implementation of this target as a result of religious and moral differences. Also, Target 5.6 of SDG 5 enjoins member states to promote laws and regulations that guarantee access to sexual and reproductive health care, information, and education for women aged 15 to 49 years. This provision has also on its own met with resistance by some groups on the basis of sociocultural and religious backgrounds. CESA, the Continental Education Strategy for Africa 2016 and to 2025, is a very beautiful framework and continental strategy that matches the 2016 to 2025 framework of the AU 2063 agenda, meets the provisions of CAP, the Common Africa Position on Post 2015 Development Agenda, as well as draw lessons from previous continental plans and strategies. CESA 16 to 25 provides unique opportunities for education stakeholders to contribute to education and training in Africa. CESA's mission is to reorientate Africa's education and training systems to meet the knowledge, competencies, skills, innovation, and creativity that are required to nurture Africa's core values and promote sustainable development across communities, national, sub-regional, regional, and continental levels. parts. Now, in terms of case studies, there are three that we've highlighted that promote education and skills development. The first one is the Global Partnership for Education, the GPE. We also look at Jobs for Youth in Africa strategy and Africa Talks Jobs. I will enjoin you as you study these case studies to also prepare to develop your own case studies from your countries on what is going on as regards inclusive education and skills development for young people. Yeah, so for your further reading, I encourage you to look at a very interesting guide that UNESCO developed in 2017 for ensuring inclusion and equality in education. Also, look at the CESA 2016-2025, then the Tibet strategy, the guide that UNESCO developed for Go 7, Go 4, and then the quick guide for education indicators for SDG 4, and the global education monitoring report. Now, this monitoring report is very important so that you understand how we can ensure inclusion and education, especially for young people, for children, and how this can be monitored and reported. Yeah, so for your assignment, you will be undertaking a case study. So using UNESCO's guide for ensuring inclusion and equality in education, and based on the knowledge you have gained so far from Module 2, you will be developing a one-page policy brief on the importance of investing in inclusive and equality education and decent work for African youth. So this is the case you will be looking at. Pick the guide and explore what is going on within your country, bearing in mind that the policy brief will be compiled and submitted alongside other deliverables from this course to IDEP. And so we would expect you submit one-page policy brief via email to me within 48 hours of studying this module. For the group discussions for this week, the two questions that we will be discussing: one, many African countries have been able to provide their young youth populations with quality education and the skills they need for the field of work. Do you agree or disagree? We need you to discuss this in full, whether or not you agree, and list your points and cite relevant source of information, credible sources of information that we can always refer to. So post your comments when you finish on the online discussion panel, and also take time to read comments by other learners so that it will enrich your knowledge base. Congratulations for completing Module 2. I welcome you now to study the course lecture notes as we prepare to move to Module 3. Thank you, and see you next week.